What's going on, folks? Ryan Kostrowski here. This is the DFS 5-pack. Hopefully everybody's having a splendid day so far. Wanted to actually go a little old school right here and talk about the daily fantasy sports or DFS terms, abbreviations, lingo, whatever it is you want to call it. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine last night, and for me and him, we've been doing the DFS thing for whatever it is, 6 or 7 years. It's been a while. So all of the terms and lingo kind of flow for us, and we're used to it. We hear people talk about it every single day. But it's a reminder, there are people out there who are more casual players or just starting to play DFS, again, daily fantasy sports, that, I don't know, they might not completely understand all of them. And they want more information out there in order to get a better understanding of what people are saying and things like that. So I want to review about a dozen of them today. There's plenty of more that we will not get to. If you have questions, if there's a term that you hear and you don't quite understand it, obviously you can Google it. Otherwise, put it in the comment section. I'll be more than happy to respond to you and kind of tell you what people are referring to when they use this term. That being said, let's kind of get into it. All right. Once again, if you are brand new to the station, my name is Ryan. This is the DFS 5-pack. I created the station a while back, acquired a business partner a few years ago. You guys all know him as well, unless you are brand new to the station, obviously. And we are known as the DFS 5-pack, which is based on our GPP strategy for NBA. What can you do if you need more DFS up? Well, really easy. Click the subscribe button. If you want more DFS videos, hit the bell for notifications. That's what we're here to do. Like the video. Follow me on social media. I got a bunch of links to Instagram and Twitter like that below. And if you really want to take your game to the next level, go ahead and sign up for a premium membership. We have packages that will fit for, basically, all types of payment structures, whether we're going annual. We got lifetime memberships available. A simple one-time $400 payment will get you in here forever. We will help you make that money back in no time. All right, so first things first, I wanted to start with cash games versus GPP or GPPs, however you want to call it. What does GPP stand for? It stands for Guaranteed Prize Pool. But essentially, GPPs are the tournaments. They are the ones that pay very heavy to the top couple places, specifically to first place. It's how you get rich, quote unquote, in the world of daily fantasy sports. They're also very, very hard to win. Having won, a decent number of them myself, they're not easy. You have to play a lot to get into the GPP win. So they come, if you play long enough and you make good decisions repeatedly, you will find your way into winning some of them, unless you really only focus on the large entry GPPs. If you're trying to get first place out of 500,000, you probably understand that is just not an easy thing to do. They range in size. They are the more popular version of what people play on here. Otherwise, we have cash games. This is how you keep your bankroll funded, in my opinion. These are head-to-heads where you're playing one-on-one against another person. 50-50, top half win, bottom half lose. You get close to double your money back. Double ups where it's a flat-up double up. I play a lot of double ups, single entry. The top, whatever it is, about 40% of the field doubles their money. You're paying a little bit of the rake. Rake is one that we could get to. I don't think I have it on here, but it's another term you might want to look up, and triple ups. Generally, for strategy points, you're looking for high floor players in cash games, and we'll review what floor means in a little bit. But essentially, guys who are going to get you some points. They're not going to ruin your lineup. And then in GPPs or tournaments, you want big ceiling players. Those are guys that can absolutely go off and have monster days. All right, what is chalk? So if you're real new to the game, you might hear people referring to the word chalk a lot and not be 100% sure what it is that people are referring to. Simple definition of chalk is those are the player or players that almost everyone is playing on a specific slate. An example would be like that. So I'm a Wisconsin guy, if you don't know that. So when Giannis Antetokounmpo sits out a game for whatever reason, Chris Middleton, Eric Bledsoe, other guys like that get major ownership. And what I mean by that is they can be 75% owned, upwards and 90% owned. So if 9 out of 10 people have you in a lineup, you are big chalk. Chalk can be a little bit relative as well. It is different as far as the percentage goes on what's considered chalk. If you're talking about a quarterback where you only play the one position on a main slate of NFL games, which could have 11 games, so there's 22 quarterbacks in play, chalk could be somebody who's 25 or 30% owned. If you're talking about an obvious play point guard on a 3-game NBA slate, Like 30% owned would not be chalk. Chalk would be like 75, 80% owned. So there's no exact answer on what the percentage is, and it does vary per sport, per how big the contest is and things like that. But it's, the more popular players. All right, next up. So you've probably heard the term fade. And no, I'm not referring to a haircut. I'm fading LeBron tonight, for example. So that just means you're not playing him. And usually this is referred to when people are talking about the chalk. So, for example, in, let's say, NFL, when we get a low-priced running back that's going to be the quote-unquote chalk, some people may not feel that that person's in a very good spot, and they feel that they can get an advantage in GPP specifically by not playing that specific chalk play right there. Chalk is better used in cash games, where you're trying to make sure you don't lose your lineup as opposed to trying to get all the way to the top. You can fade chalk in GPPs. It can be a little bit of a riskier fade if it's a really, really good chalk play. But when those chalk players don't do well, you can get a big advantage on the field if they falter. So fading is just simply not playing that guy, but it's generally a term that you're going to hear referred to when people are talking about chalk players. Like nobody says I'm fading a guy who's 1% owned that night if he's a low owned type of player. All right, so we brought these up a little bit ago, and the terms floor and ceiling should be relatively simple to understand. We all know floors are on the bottom, the ceilings are on the top. Floor is basically a minimum number of points that you can expect a player to get, or receive, barring like injury or an NBA if he gets 3 fouls in the first 3 minutes. Last week, and again, some of you guys might be watching this years later, but Justin Jackson, a running back for the Chargers, was like 50 to 55% owned, so he was pretty chalky. And we all thought he had a real nice floor of points, but he got hurt on the first play of the game, received no DFS points. So he didn't get his floor, but injuries are a part of the game. You can't really factor that into the equation. Otherwise, everybody's floor is 0 because they could potentially get hurt on the first play of the game. Ceiling is more like what's a maximum number of points this guy could receive. So if you are going for it, when you play GPPs, your goal should generally be to get to the top. If you're just trying to finish in the money, you might as well just play cash games. But when you're playing GPPs, you want guys with higher ceilings. In baseball, that's guys who hit home runs and steal bases. In football, that for quarterbacks, it could be guys who run a little bit. Because a guy who runs, if you can run for 100 yards like Kyler Murray and run in 2 touchdowns, you just have a much higher ceiling than, say, a non-mobile quarterback who just never has 5 touchdown passes, if that makes sense. So in cash games, you typically want high floor plays. In GPPs, you got guys with bigger ceilings more often than not. All right, next up, I know Matt and I use this one a lot, and it's a dart throw. And it essentially refers to like what would be considered like a long shot type of play. These guys are, going to typically be lower owned players. They're lower owned for a reason, because while they do have a path to success, it's not the likely outcome of playing this person. As far as like a strategic sense for dart throws, like you don't want to have dart throws in cash games if you can help it. Like if you love your 7 lineups and you feel like, let's just say you're playing NBA. If you love your 7 players in an 8-person lineup and you got one like low money dart throw that you feel good about, okay, I can get it. You don't want dart throws in cash games, but sometimes if you love the other 87% of your lineup, okay, fine. I can understand it right there. But in GPPs, like one really good low-owned dart throw might be all that you need to differentiate yourself from the field. Many moons ago, a bunch of my customers and we played J.J. Hardy when he was on the Baltimore Orioles. Dude got super lucky. He hit 2 home runs in that game. Both of them went right off the pesky pole in Fenway Park, so they were balls that shouldn't even be home runs. But at 0.5% ownership, and I think he had a 2 RBI double on top of that, he absolutely goes off, and we were the only people using him. That was a dart throw that worked out. That's not usually the way it works, but when it does, it can, a bunch of us won GPPs that night. So it's great when it works out, but they are lower owned for a reason. All right, exposure. You can hear people refer to it, and they'll ask a question like, how much exposure are you going to have to Kyler Murray this weekend? And then you might hear an answer like, I'm going to play him in cash games and have about 33% exposure in GPPs, essentially meaning, right, I'll play him in about 1 out of my 3 GPPs. So this is more served for multi-entry players. Now, if you're brand new to the game, most people who specialize in GPPs they enter multiple lineups. And this can range from, somebody who plays in like a 3-entry max, which are a tournament lineup where you can only enter 3 times. And then they have, ones where you enter 150 times, for example. If you are playing like multiple lineups 150 times, that is where the term exposure comes more into play, because you're trying to calculate, take a guess. And if, let's say, Kyler Murray is predicted to be 10% owned, but you give him 33% exposure, you are overexposed compared to the field. If he is going to be 40% owned and you only play him once in 150 lineups, which that would seem kind of silly, but you are underexposed compared to the field. All right, next up, late swap. It's exactly what it says it is. It's being able to swap a player late. So it's the ability to change a player in your lineup after the early games are start. Certain websites, have gone back and forth on this. I have a love-hate relationship with it myself personally. One, as somebody who follows this stuff closely, I love the ability to switch my players in the late game. As somebody who has children and a life, I love the fact that there is no late swap, or there has been no late swap, because for me, I like to just set it and forget it. Sometimes when guys in your late lineups or in the later games are in your lineup and they end up not playing, this is especially in basketball, yeah, it sucks, man. And it's hard to take that L on the day. It doesn't feel good. It feels like a nice kick to the nuts, right? However, there's a lot of other times you win money because people in other people's lineups, the same thing happens to them. So late swap, people love it if they think that they pay more attention to the field. If you have a significant other in your life, for example, who doesn't want you to be on your phone or computer all night long, you might really like the idea of no late swaps so that you can be even with the field. But all it means is that you can switch the players in your lineup after the first game's locked. All right, optimizer. So this is something else that you're probably going to hear, especially for people who play GPPs and do a lot of mass multi-entering. Thank you. Can't say that 3 times fast. All right. It is a tool that you generally need to subscribe and pay money to a website. There's a bunch of websites out there that have this tool. I don't have an opinion on what the best one is. I build my lineups by hand, so I am not the right person to get advice on this. But if you want to use one and enter lots of lineups, it's going to make your life a hell of a lot easier. And you can get this tool through a lot of the major DFS sites. If it's something you're thinking about doing, just sit down and Google it, do a little research, find who meets your price point. They probably all have a bunch of pluses and minuses associated with them. But what you do is you set guidelines for what kind of, for the lineups that you want to be created, how much exposure you want to certain players, certain games. You can set lots of different guidelines for how you want your lineups to be built. Because trying to build 150 lineups by hand, it is a tedious and almost impossible task. So if you're going to be one of those people that plays mass multi-entering, you're going to need to really understand what an optimizer is. And if you're curious about this, hop on YouTube, hop on Google, start reading about it, go sign up for a website that offers it, and start getting better at using it. If you want to be one of those professional DFS players who does this thing full time, you're probably going to need to learn how to use one of these. All right, next up, pivot is a term that you're going to use and hear used in the DFS world. An example of how you might hear it used, I'm going to breeze since Devontae Adams is out or because the weather is bad in Wisconsin. It's a really simple term to understand. You're just switching to a new player. Normally, when you're pivoting somebody, it's in the same price point because then you're not completely changing your lineup. Not saying that you can't use the term if you're completely redoing your lineup. Like if I'm looking at an NFL slate and I got Kyler Murray at 8,000 and Derek Carr at 5,500, I can pivot to Derek Carr, but then I also need to add in the caveat that I'm upgrading, Christian Kirk to DeAndre Hopkins, for example, or whatever it might be. It could be, you can pivot to try to take an advantage on the field. For example, if you're playing basketball, and let's say Giannis and LeBron are almost the exact same price, and you keep hearing as the slate's about to lock or close that Giannis is going to be big chalk. And you're like, you know what? In GPPs, I'm going to pivot from Giannis to LeBron because LeBron's going to be 10% is owned as Giannis, and I want to try to get an advantage on the field, for example. All right, guys. We keep moving down the list. Don't forget to click that thumbs up on the video if you have not. We got a couple more to discuss before we wrap it up for the day. A punt or a punt play, for example. What is that? It's a low-price player, somebody you can make a rational case for using and how they could succeed, but it's not a guaranteed thing. So this weekend, if you're catching this, Mike Davis is the bare minimum for running backs on DraftKings, and he is the starting running back because Christian McCaffrey has been ruled out. They ruled him out after DraftKings released pricing, so he is not – it's hard to qualify him as a punt play because he's going to be massive, massive, massive chalk. He's what we call a free square, right? Somebody that everybody's using. You put him in your lineup. You lower the number of picks you need to get it right. A punt play, for example, when you're paying like on showdown slates and you see those guys for like $200, $400, $600, which is less than 1% of your salary, you might punt with somebody, hope they can get a couple touches, and that's all that you need. But you're using that as a punt play in order to load up on higher quality players in other areas. So just a cheap guy, more often referred to somebody who's not a guaranteed thing, but somebody who can make a rational case for their success. Excuse me. All right, next up is recency bias, which is one that I know we've been using a lot more the last couple of years. And a lot of this has to do with the psychology of DFS players and how they feel about things, or pretty much just sports fans in general. And what it is overreacting due to a recent game or stretch of games. And I think a great example of this is take like a stud pitcher like a Max Scherzer or a Jacob deGrom. And if he has a bad outing, years ago, more people would become obsessed with the recency bias and not play him next time out. The DFS community has definitely gotten more intelligent over the years, myself included, definitely part of that. Whereas when we see an elite stud pitcher who has a bad outing, now we're more likely to play him because we think he has a great week of practice in a bounce back situation. So it's almost the inverse of recency bias. We see a bad start and we're more likely to pounce on him. But generally, recency bias is overreacting due to a recent game or stretch of games. Another example would be in the NBA. You know, some guys get all their points via shooting. Klay Thompson would be a great example of this. At the end of the night, if he averages 30 DK points, it's because he averages scoring 20, throws in 2 extra points because he makes 4 3-pointers a game, and then, runs into a couple of rebounds and assists. He's kind of a bad example because he's a great shooter, but there's other lesser players. They get on a hot run of shooting. And then everybody's like, well, I'm going to play him because he's been so good lately. Okay. It can work out that way. Sometimes shooters get hot and they're good for a week, 2 weeks, whatever it might be. But as a shooter gets hot and his price increases, eventually there's going to be a day where that all comes crashing down. You don't shoot 60% from 3 forever. You might do it for a week or 4 or 5 games in a row, but that ain't going to keep up forever. I mean, you guys know it. And you can ask yourself, am I a victim to recency bias right here? Because I'm now paying $6,200 for a guy who should be about $5K because he's been hot? Or do I really feel like the hot trend just continues? It does have its place. I would say, to me, the number one place where I allow recency bias to influence my decisions is baseball. And when it comes to hitters, baseball you play every day. The likelihood of a baseball player being hot or not hot is far greater than a football player who has a week off between his games. And also the matchup will dictate a lot more in the game of football than it does. And, it does influence things in the game of baseball, i.e., if you're going up against Jacob deGrom or the worst pitcher in baseball, it's a big difference. But baseball hitters ride more waves, so they go up and down. So recency bias is more of a thing that you should allow into your equation in baseball, for example. In football, it means almost nothing. All right, next up, we're talking stacks now, ladies and gentlemen, stacks and stacks and stacks. It's playing a group of players from a team or a game in order to try to maximize points generally. There's a couple reasons that we do this. The place that it's most heavily utilized is going to be within the world of MLB DFS. And there's a couple reasons for that. One, trying to evaluate 9 different hitters, based on, who they're going up against. I mean, it's a tedious, long task. It's just harder to do. It is a lot easier to pick a team you like. For example, I think the Yankees are going to go off tonight. 1, because they do a lot. 2, because they're in a great spot. 3, great hitting weather in the park, whatever the reason might be. But you're going up against a team or a pitcher in a position that you like. Also, let's say that leads the game off with a double. Well, if Luke Voit comes up 2 batters later and drives him in with an RBI single, you're doubling up on your points there with a run and an RBI in that hit. So there is that. Again, I don't want to reiterate enough. It's super, super easy to do because you pick somebody you want to pick on. You can go 5 deep on DraftKings, for example. But there's a few reasons that you do it in baseball. It's the place that's most heavily utilized, but it does have its spot in other games. For example, in the world of football, people will often talk about a quarterback being stacked with 1 or 2 of his pass catchers. The idea being that if Will Fuller and Brandon Cooks both go off, that probably means Deshaun Watson went off. And then a lot of times you want to use something called a bring back, which is like this weekend. Like we wouldn't use this example because there are highest wins in Cleveland and you don't want to use a passing attack there. But if you were going off with Deshaun Watson and Will Fuller and Brandon Cooks, then you have to assume that it's going to correlate to something on the Cleveland Browns, whether it's Nick Chubb had a monster day on the ground or Baker Mayfield and Jarvis Landry were going crazy in the passing game. So you like to usually bring it with a bring back a little bit in football, but essentially it's generally going to be referred to as a quarterback with 1 or 2 of his pass catchers as a stack. Last up is NBA. And for me, and this could just be for me, this doesn't have to be for anybody else, I personally think that myself, the DFS 5-pack as a whole, we do more stacking in NBA than the average DFS tout out there. Humble brag real quick. I have dozens of NBA GPP wins, so I feel like I have some reason to feel like my strategy works right here. And the reason I like stacking in NBA is for the best way to look at this is in NBA, if it's a close game, a lot of times when your guys lose value is because the game gets super slow paced, or it's because the game's lopsided and guys lose their minutes, for example. But if it's a close, high-paced game, and we've seen in those games where 2 bad teams, like the Wizards and the Sun are playing each other, and it's 129 to 127 at the end of it, there was a ton of DFS points in it. The pace was insane. We had turnovers. We had points. Yeah, maybe you don't want to go 7 deep in a game, but by playing guys from both sides, I've had a lot of success going 4 or 5 deep on NBA. Now, you have to like the players. Don't force it, right? Don't force guys in there that you don't like. But the other thing, and don't forget this, especially if you're playing in very, very large entry number tournaments, if there's an OT game and you're not exposed to it, you're not going to be winning those large tournaments. And yes, you can never guess which games are going to go into overtime or if any even will. But having watched myself and lots of our customers win big money because they have been 3, 4, 5 deep on a certain game, when it goes to overtime, and you got 5 guys out there getting 5 extra minutes, so it comes out to 25 minutes. I mean, that could be 40, 50 DFS points. No kidding. So it's a way to get to the top of GPPs. And if you're playing in those 30, 40,000 entries, you almost have to hope for something like that because it is difficult to get to the top of a situation like that. So that's a little bit about stacks. That's all I got for you guys. There are plenty of other terms out there that we could discuss. I don't want to keep people on here for too long. Appreciate y'all watching. Memberships are available at the website below. Click the thumbs up button if you haven't already. And best of luck playing DFS. It's a hard game. If you're brand new to the game and you're not having a lot of success, it doesn't have to even be me, but I advise paying for some help early on. Me and half the people I talk to who have gone through this, we all felt because we were good at fantasy sports that we could just walk into the DFS world and be competitive. It took a learning curve, man. It was not easy. It was not easy at all. I was playing for months and had absolutely no clue what was going on. If I had spent even $100 from professional DFS people out there and gotten a little bit of kickstart of my knowledge, I would have ended up being more profitable than if I had just been pissing my own money away for a longer period of time. The same thing happened to me playing online poker. I thought, and this is way back, guys, over 15 years ago, I thought because I dominated the games, all my friends, playing home games, that I could walk onto Party Poker back in the day and just dominate that. It was not how it worked out. That was not how it worked out at all. I sat down with my buddy Troy one day, and the next thing I knew, it was 12 hours later, and we were both $1,000 out and couldn't believe what had just happened. Now, we got better. We won that money back, but there was a real learning curve that went with it. And if you're new to DFS, it's no different. All right, guys, appreciate y'all. Have a great day.